Good morning, you're watching World News and I'm your host, Klaudia Czerwińska. Poland's Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski has emphasized that U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio has denied media reports that the United States is demanding that Ukraine illegally renounce Crimea. Speaking in an interview with the Gazeta Wyborcza newspaper, Sikorski said this was an important signal. The minister added that Rubio spoke about Ukraine as a sovereign state that should have the right to develop its army and its defense industry. Sikorski also said Europe's focus on developing its military capabilities means it will be ready to effectively confront Russian aggression by the end of the decade. The Russian army carried out a drone strike against Ukraine's eastern Dnipropetrovsk region. According to local authorities, the attack killed 3 and wounded 10 people.
According to the regional governor, Serhiy Lysek, 8 of the wounded in Pavlograd have been transported to the local hospital. Among them is a 17-year-old boy. According to the Ukrainian Air Force, the Russian army launched 103 drones over Ukraine in the past 24 hours, with 41 Shahed UAVs shot down using conventional weapons and 40 destroyed using electronic systems.
Russia attempted to develop ground assault operations under the cover of airstrikes, said Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy. He also added that Ukrainian investigators are examining missiles and drones to establish whether a third country supplied components to Russia and North Korea.
Almost 150 Russian attacks against our positions and more than 4,500 attacks, including from heavy weapons. In fact, the Russians tried to develop assault operations under the cover of their massive attack. While our forces were concentrating on defending against missiles and drones, the Russians intensified their ground attacks. Also, our investigators, forensic scientists and experts are inspecting the sites of missile and drone strikes, establishing and verifying the circumstances of the relevant attacks, and conducting examinations of the found missile and drone debris to establish full information about these weapons and critical components in them that were supplied to Russia or North Korea from third countries and used in production.
United States President Donald Trump said Russia offered major concessions regarding a peace deal with Ukraine. During last evening's press conference in the White House, Trump went on to claim that Russia not annexing the rest of Ukraine is a big concession in itself.
What concessions has Russia offered up thus far to get to the point where you're closer to peace?
Stopping the war, taking the whole country. Pretty big concession. Working with Ukraine, we'll do the best we can, but they lost a lot of territory. When you say Crimea, that was handed over during a president named Barack Hussein Obama. That had nothing to do with me, Crimea. That was 11 years ago with Obama, and they made a decision. There wasn't a bullet fired, there was no fighting, there was no anything. They just handed it over. Now they say, well, can you get it back? I think that's going to be a very difficult thing to do. That was given by Barack Obama when he was president, not by Donald Trump.
The U.S. is denying any claims that it would lift sanctions on Russia as part of a peace deal in Ukraine. A media report out on Thursday indicated the White House was considering relaunching Nord Stream 2, something Europe is firmly against.
Lifting sanctions in exchange for a peace deal in Ukraine. Politico has reported that the White House was debating lifting restrictions on the Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline and other Russian assets in Europe.
This is unequivocally false. Neither Steve Witkoff nor I have had any conversations about lifting sanctions against Russia as part of a deal with Ukraine. This is journalistic malpractice.
Since a large portion of Europe's LNG is now imported from the United States, the move would seem harmful to American businesses. Relaunching any of the 2 Nord Stream pipelines would mean more Russian natural gas on the European market.
Poland's position has been quite clear that Russia needs to pay the price for the aggression. So at this moment it's quite clear that we are not open to ideas of lifting sanctions.
The main proponent behind the idea, according to Politico, is U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff, who is in and out of Russia leading the talks with Putin. Marco Rubio and other members of the administration were reportedly against the idea of lifting sanctions. In November of last year, the Wall Street Journal reported that an American businessman was interested in purchasing Nord Stream 2.
Stephen P. Lynch, who prefers to stay under the radar, says a deal for the Russian pipeline would serve long-term US interests.
A person who's familiar with how business is done in Russia was the guest of the latest episode of TVP World's On the Record. Bill Browder has accused the Russian state of killing his lawyer and threatening him and his relatives.
It's a complete, lawless, dangerous, physically dangerous, financially dangerous country. It's an insanity to do business in Russia. It amazes me that these guys are running around touting this as a good idea.
In 2019, towards the end of his first term as president, Donald Trump imposed sanctions on entities that were in charge of finishing the construction of Nord Stream 2. Joe Biden lifted them and subsequently reintroduced them after the launch of the full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2022. The pipeline was never officially opened and was damaged in an attack in September of 2022. But one of its threads could be operational if sanctions were lifted.
The sanctions are not a problem of America only, there's a world problem. And I think that US can withdraw sanctions, but it will be a question for Europe how to behave, yes. Just to follow Americans or to protect sanctions for Russia.
Over the past 3 years, Europe has made an enormous effort to wean itself off of Russian energy supplies. Reversing this policy is not something the old continent is keen on doing.
Nord Stream is history and it will not be repeated. Nord Stream was a mistake and we should have listened more carefully and at an earlier stage to our friends and partners in Eastern Europe.
For TVP World, I'm Marek Steele.
Poland is proposing to cut EU red tape to help accelerate the bloc's plans to increase its military spending. The initiative will be promoted as part of Poland's rotating presidency of the Council of the European Union, which ends in June. In March, the European Commission unveiled a plan to mobilize 800 billion euros for European defense spending. Deputy Minister in the Prime Minister's office, Ignacy Niemczycki, told the Polish press agency that if Europe is to increase its level of defense readiness, procedures must be changed. It's thought the initiative could also simplify regulations around EU agricultural policy. NATO member states spent more than $1.3 billion on defense last year, with 22 out of 32 countries surpassing the 2% of GDP guideline, according to the bloc's official figures.
The member states upped their spending at an unprecedented 10% rate year-on-year amid US President Donald Trump's threats that his country will not help partners who underinvest in defense capabilities. Countries that missed the defense spending target, including Spain, Belgium and Italy, have all vowed to boost their investment in the military. Largest European countries, Germany, the UK and France, barely made the cut, narrowly exceeding 2%. The highest spenders are to be found on NATO's eastern flank, with Poland being the only member of the bloc to have spent more than 4% of its GDP on defense in 2024. The expenditures report comes as Washington is exerting pressure on other NATO countries to bump the spending mark from 2 to 5% of GDP.
Finland is set to slash its tax rates in a bid to lure investors and amass more capital to enhance its defense spending. The plan, unveiled by the Finnish government on Thursday, involves bringing the corporate income tax from 20% to 18% starting from 2027. The country's center-right Prime Minister Petteri Orpo expressed hope the changes would make Finland, quote, one of the most attractive countries in Europe for investment, end quote. VAT and personal income tax cuts will be aimed at the poor, but the defense expenditures will in turn require the country to tighten the purse strings with regard to higher education, municipalities and the church. The reforms are to serve as a stepping stone for the country to boost its defense spending from the current 2.4% to 3% by 2029. Poland will on Friday mark the 1000th anniversary of the crowning of the first Polish king, Bolesław the Brave.
President Andrzej Duda and Prime Minister Donald Tusk will attend a commemoration ceremony in the central western city of Gniezno, where the coronation took place. The president is due to lay a wreath at the monument of Bolesław the Brave before unveiling a commemoration plaque. The 1025 coronation is significant in Polish history because it marks the moment when Poland became a sovereign state that was recognized by other European countries.
With the funeral of Pope Francis set for Saturday, the preparations are in full swing. The faithful are gathering in Rome to say their final goodbyes to the beloved pontiff, and the cardinals have assembled for a general congregation. 113 cardinals are taking part in the gathering. The details of Pope's funeral have been decided, so Friday's assembly is expected to focus on debating the date for the upcoming conclave and the future of the Catholic Church. Outside the Vatican hallways of power, 100,000 faithful have already paid their respects to the late pontiff, and more are still expected. On Friday, St. Peter's Basilica will stay open for visitors until 7 p.m. Then at 8 p.m., the rite of closing the casket will take place, consisting of putting a sack of gold, silver, and copper coins produced during each year of Pope Francis's pontificate inside of the coffin. The ceremony will be led by Camerlengo Kevin Furrow. The Holy See officially unveiled the list of officials who will attend Saturday's funeral for Pope Francis. It includes some 130 delegations, including 50 heads of government and 10 monarchs. Among the attendees will be the U.S. President Donald Trump and his Ukrainian counterpart Volodymyr Zelenskyy. The list of officials present at Pope Francis's funeral also includes the presidents of Poland, France, Germany, Lithuania, Latvia, Slovakia, Moldova, and Hungary. While most countries have sent their heads of state, Israel will be represented by a lower-level delegation consisting of the Israeli ambassador to the Holy See, Yaron Sideman. Similarly to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, Russian President Vladimir Putin will not be attending the funeral. People across Slovakia took to the streets on Thursday evening to express their disgruntlement with new legislation that, in their opinion, aimed to crack down on non-governmental organizations.
Several cities in Slovakia, including Bratislava, Košice and Banska Bystrica, saw anti-government demonstrations, which are part of a wave of protests that began after Slovakian Prime Minister Fico traveled to Moscow in December, where he met with Vladimir Putin. Protesters in the capital Bratislava chanted "No to the Russian law" and "Slovakia is Europe."
The government is showing its incompetence in everything it does, aligning itself with the Russian aggressor. It is trying to find ways to suppress freedom in Slovakia, which will lead to the overall decline of the country, its institutions, hospitals, healthcare facilities. In fact, the entire world as we knew it in Slovakia is deteriorating and starting to resemble Russia, where the state is dysfunctional and the people are not free.
Protesters in Bratislava also rallied in front of the presidential palace. They urged President Peter Pellegrini not to sign the NGO Act into law, and he has until May 2nd to make a final decision on the legislation. Though widely considered an ally of Prime Minister Fico, Pellegrini has opposed some of the Fico government's policies.
And so this marks the end of our news broadcast, but please do stay tuned. We're back in just a moment with more news and features.